My daughter-in-law banned me from seeing my grandkids after I gave them everything, but when I cut off the $4,500 a month I was paying, now she's begging without apologizing. And I created a scholarship fund with that money. I'm 60 years old. I've been a widow for 7 years. I run a farm that I inherited from my late husband. And I need to tell this story because what happened with my son, Robert, and his wife, Melissa, basically ripped me out of my grandchildren's lives, and there are still days when I wake up and can't believe this is real. The thing is, I was always a present mother, you know, the kind who's there for her children no matter what. And when Robert married Melissa about 12 years ago, I was happy for him. I really was, even though from the beginning I noticed that Melissa was a bit complicated, let's say. But I thought it was just me, that maybe I was being one of those prejudiced mother-in-laws. So I swallowed my doubts and decided to give her a chance. Robert was always a good son, hardworking, responsible, but he was never very good with money. I'll admit that. When he married Melissa, he was working at a tech company and was making decent money. Nothing spectacular, but enough. And I thought they were going to be fine. The problem is that Melissa from day one made it clear that she wasn't going to work, that she wanted to be a full-time mom. And look, I respect that. Every family makes their decisions, but the way she said it was as if working was something degrading, as if women who work were less of mothers or something like that. So, when Samuel was born 7 years ago, I was over the moon. He was my first grandson, and I loved him with all my soul. And from the beginning, I got very involved. I visited them often. I stayed to babysit so they could go out. You know, normal grandma stuff. But here comes the part that maybe I should have seen as a warning sign. A few months after Samuel was born, Robert and Melissa started having money problems. Melissa spent as if Robert earned twice what he actually earned. She bought designer clothes for the baby, wanted to redecorate the house every 3 months, ate out constantly, and when Robert tried to talk to her about the budget, she would get furious and tell him that he didn't earn enough, that she deserved a better life. I know this because Robert told me, literally crying on the phone sometimes, and as a mother, you can't just stand by watching your son suffer. You know what I mean? So I started helping them financially. First with small things. I paid for Samuel's daycare, bought them diapers, stuff like that. But little by little it escalated. When they were going to buy their first house about 5 years ago, I gave them the entire down payment. It was like $60,000 from my savings. Because I thought that if they had their own house, they would be more stable, more secure. Melissa didn't even thank me directly. I found out later because Robert told me she had said something like, "Your mom finally did something useful." But I swallowed it because, well, I wanted my son to have his home. By then Andrew had already been born, my second grandson, who was like 2 years old, and I was completely in love with those 2 kids. I saw them every weekend. They stayed with me on the farm during the summer. It was the best part of my life after losing my husband. Things got really complicated when the pandemic hit in 2020. Robert lost his job, like it happened to a lot of people, and suddenly they were left without any income because, of course, Melissa still refused to work. She said that with the kids home all the time it was impossible, and technically she was right. But there were also many mothers who found ways to work from home or do something, anything. But not Melissa. She insisted it wasn't her responsibility. So I, as always, came to the rescue. I started paying them basically everything. The mortgage, the utilities, the credit cards they had maxed out, food, the kids' private school, everything. We're talking about like $4,500 a month, sometimes more. And I could do it because the farm gave me good income and I had my husband's savings. But still it was a huge expense. What hurt me the most wasn't the money. Seriously, it was that while I was keeping them afloat, Melissa started distancing herself from me in a very obvious way. She would cancel the kids' visits to the farm with silly excuses, like, "Oh, Samuel has a cough," when I knew he was perfectly fine because Robert sent me pictures of them playing outside. When I went to visit them, Melissa barely spoke to me. She stayed in her room or went out with a friend and left Robert to deal with me, as if I were a nuisance. The kids asked me why they couldn't come to the farm as much as before, and I didn't know what to tell them. I made up excuses so they wouldn't feel bad. Then last year, like 15 months ago, I decided to do something special for Samuel and Andrew. I had been saving specifically for this, and I took them to Disneyland. It was a 4-day trip, just them and me, and it was magical. Seriously, it was one of the best experiences of my life. Samuel was 6 years old and Andrew was 4, and seeing them meet Mickey Mouse, go on the rides, eat ice cream until they burst, it was just perfect. I bought them some things. Normal souvenirs, nothing excessive, some Mickey ears, a lightsaber for Samuel, stuff like that, and we took like 1,000 pictures. When I brought them back home, they were so excited, telling their parents everything, and I thought Melissa would be happy that the kids had that experience, but the way she looked at me when we arrived, it was like pure hatred. I don't know how else to describe it. The next few days were weird. Robert didn't call me like he normally would to thank me, and when I tried to contact him, his responses were super short. I thought maybe he was busy looking for a job, because by then he had been unemployed for like a year, and I was starting to pressure him a little to find something, anything. But then, like a week after the Disneyland trip, something happened that still breaks my heart to remember. It was like 9 at night, and I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered, and it was Samuel, my grandson, crying softly, and he told me, "Grandma, I miss you. Mom says I can't see you anymore, but I want to go to the farm." And before I could answer him, I heard Melissa yelling in the background, and the call got cut off. I stood there paralyzed with the phone in my hand, literally unable to process what had just happened. I tried calling Robert like 20 times that night, but he didn't answer. And the next day I received an email from Melissa, a long email full of venom that basically accused me of manipulating the children, of trying to buy their love, of making them feel like I was a better mother than her. She said horrible things, like that I was a bitter old woman trying to steal her children, that the Disneyland trip had been a calculated move to make her look bad, that I had never respected her as a mother. I read that email like 5 times, trying to understand where all that hatred was coming from. And each time I felt more confused and hurt because I had never, ever tried to compete with her or make her feel less. I forwarded the email to Robert and asked him to explain what was happening, and he finally called me. He sounded exhausted and defeated, and he told me the truth that I think deep down I already knew. Melissa was jealous of me. He told me, literally told me, "Mom, she's jealous because the kids love you more, because when they're with you they're happier, because you buy them things we can't buy them, because you spend quality time with them." And I told him, "Robert, I'm not trying to replace her. I just want to be part of my grandchildren's lives." And he responded that he knew, that he understood, but that Melissa was out of control with this, and that he needed me to give her space. Space? Can you believe it? He was asking me to distance myself from my own grandchildren so as not to hurt his wife's feelings, a wife I was financially supporting, by the way. But I tried to be reasonable. I told him, okay, that I was going to respect what they needed as a couple, that I just wanted us to find a way to resolve this. About 3 weeks went by without me seeing the kids, no calls, nothing, and I was devastated. But I kept sending the monthly money because, well, and they needed it, and I wasn't going to let my grandchildren suffer because of adult problems. Then came the final blow. Robert came to see me one Saturday morning, alone, without the kids, and I knew immediately that something bad was going to happen from his face. We sat in my kitchen, and he couldn't even look me in the eyes. And after like 10 minutes of beating around the bush, he dropped it on me. Melissa had decided that I couldn't see the kids anymore, ever, that I was officially forbidden from having contact with Samuel and Andrew because my presence was toxic to the family. I was in shock, like literally couldn't speak, and I asked him if he agreed with that, if he really thought I was toxic, and he just shook his head and said he had to support his wife, that it was his marriage and he had to prioritize it. Something broke in me at that moment. You know, like when you realize you've been being used and that your love has been taken for granted. I told Robert, looking him straight in the eyes, that if Melissa was going to forbid me from seeing my grandchildren, then I was also going to make a decision. I wasn't going to give them another cent. No mortgage, no credit cards, no school, nothing. If I wasn't good enough to be a grandmother, then I wasn't good enough to be their personal bank either. Robert turned pale and started begging, saying I couldn't do that to them, that they were going to end up on the street, that the kids were going to suffer, and I responded that his children were going to suffer anyway because he had chosen to leave them without their grandmother, so now he and Melissa would have to figure out how to support their family on their own, like responsible adults. He left my house crying, and I stayed in the kitchen crying too. But somehow I felt liberated. You know? Like I had finally set a boundary after years of letting them treat me like an ATM with feelings. The first few days were horrible. I'm not going to lie. I spent them looking at pictures of Samuel and Andrew, wondering if I was doing the right thing, feeling guilty for cutting off the financial support, but also thinking about all the times Melissa had disrespected me, all the times she had canceled visits, all the signs I had ignored. Not even a month passed before the consequences started for them. Robert had to get 2 jobs, one at a warehouse during the day and another delivering food at night, and Melissa still wasn't working, but now she also didn't have money for her compulsive shopping. They had to take the kids out of private school and put them in public. They sold one of their cars, and according to what I heard later from a mutual friend, they started fighting constantly about money. I still had no contact with my grandchildren. That didn't change. Melissa remained firm in her position that I was the devil incarnate or something like that. What did happen is that Melissa started talking badly about me to everyone. I found out from my hairdresser, who turns out is also Melissa's hairdresser, that she was going around telling a completely distorted version of the story, saying that I was a controlling mother-in-law who had tried to buy her children, that I had cut off support out of nowhere for no reason, that I was a horrible person who didn't respect boundaries. Obviously, my hairdresser knows the truth because she's known me for years, but it hurt to know that Melissa was destroying my reputation like that, especially considering that I had never spoken badly of her to anyone, not even when I had every reason to do so. Like 6 months went by and their situation kept getting worse. Robert worked, so much that he basically didn't see his kids. Melissa was still bitter, and now also stressed because they didn't have money even for basic things. They started not paying the credit cards and accumulated a debt that, according to what Robert told me later, was like $40,000. The house was about to go into foreclosure at one point, but they managed to negotiate something with the bank. All that time, I didn't know anything about the kids. I didn't know how they were, if they remembered me, if they had been told anything about why Grandma wasn't in their lives anymore, and that uncertainty was killing me inside. Then, about 2 months ago, I received another email from Melissa, and when I saw her name in my inbox, my heart skipped a beat. I opened the email and it was long, but it wasn't an apology, not even close. It was basically a plea for financial help disguised as a family update. She told me about their money problems, about how Robert was exhausted, about how the kids were having difficulties in the new school, and at the end, she asked me if I could reconsider my decision to cut off support. Not a single word of "I'm sorry," not an acknowledgement that she had forbidden me from seeing my grandchildren, nothing. She just wanted my money again. I didn't respond immediately because I needed to process what I was feeling. On one hand, it hurt to know that Samuel and Andrew were having a hard time because I loved them and never wanted them to suffer. On the other hand, it made me angry that Melissa had the nerve to ask me for help after everything she had done, without even an apology. I finally responded with a very short email saying that I wasn't going to resume financial support until she and Robert were willing to have an honest conversation about what had happened. That this included allowing me to see my grandchildren again, and that I needed a real apology, not just empty words. I never received a response. I decided I needed to focus on myself, because I had spent years putting my son and his family first, neglecting my own life and well-being. I started going to a support group for grandparents who are separated from their grandchildren, and I discovered that there are so many people in my situation, more than you'd imagine, and that helped me not feel so alone. I also started volunteering at a local organization that helps low-income families, and I found a lot of purpose in that, in being able to help people who really need it and who appreciate what I do. I joined a book club. I took up my hobby of gardening again. I started planning a trip to Europe that I always wanted to take with my husband, but we never could. And little by little, I was rebuilding a life that didn't revolve around Robert and Melissa's drama. The most significant thing I did was establish a scholarship fund in my late husband's name for low-income students in our community. I took part of the money I used to support Robert and Melissa, like $25,000, and put it in that fund. Every year, we're going to give scholarships to 2 students so they can go to college, and knowing that I'm making that difference in the lives of young people who really value it fills me in a way I never felt when I was just giving money to my son so his wife could keep not working and buying unnecessary things. Does it still hurt not seeing Samuel and Andrew? Every day? Seriously, not a day goes by without me thinking about them and wondering how they are, what they're doing, if they miss me. But I've also learned that I can't force a relationship where I'm not wanted, and that my mental health and dignity also matter. I've made it clear, both to Robert and Melissa, that my door is open if someday they're ready to truly apologize and to treat me with the respect I deserve. But until that happens, I'm going to keep living my life, taking care of myself, and finding ways to be happy that don't depend on people who use me. Robert calls me from time to time, usually when things are really bad financially, and although it hurts to hear him suffer, I stay firm in my position. I've told him that I need to hear a sincere apology from Melissa and a real commitment that I'm going to be able to be part of my grandchildren's lives before I even consider helping again. And so far, that hasn't happened. The last time we talked, like 3 weeks ago, he told me that Melissa had finally gotten a part-time job at a store, which seemed ironic to me considering that for years she insisted she couldn't work, but I was glad to know that at least they're trying to be more responsible. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, honestly. I have hope that someday Samuel and Andrew will be old enough to seek me out on their own, to ask their own questions about why Grandma disappeared from their lives, and when that day comes, I'll be here with open arms. In the meantime, I'm learning to find peace in the decision I made, as painful as it was. Sometimes I think I was too harsh, that maybe I should have kept helping them despite everything. But then I remember how they treated me, how they used me, and I know that setting that boundary was necessary, not just to protect myself, but also to teach Robert that actions have consequences and that he can't allow his wife to control and manipulate the entire family without repercussions. Last week, I was at the supermarket and I saw a grandmother with her grandchildren, and I got a lump in my throat watching how they interacted, how the kids laughed with her, and for a moment I allowed myself to cry right there in the cereal aisle. But then I dried my tears, finished my shopping, went home, and continued with my day. Because that's what I do now. I move forward. I guess that's enough for now.